I will start with Greece, of course. Yesterday you met with the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister on Monday. What was the main topics that you discussed with them?
So I came here for a conference, but it was also a great opportunity to have first talks with the new government. The government is now in place for a bit more than a week, so not everything is defined, but it's good to learn early what will be the main orientations of the policies of the new government. And from the ESM perspective, of course, we are particularly interested in the economic issues. We have a long-term interest in Greece. ESM loans will be only repaid over the next 50 years, so we will have a long-term relationship and very similar interests. The ESM wants to see more growth and healthy developments in Greece. That's also the best way to gain debt sustainability. And it was very good to hear from the Prime Minister and the Finance Ministers that this is also the main orientation that the new government will have, to generate more growth, more employment, and that's, I think, good for the Greek people and for the ESM as a creditor.
The new government is preparing a number of tax reforms measures, starting some of them from 2019. Most of them will implement in 2020 and 2021. Did you discuss them with Mr. Staikouras? How do you see them? And do you think that with these measures the overall commitment is achieved? I'm talking mainly about 2019 and 2020.
We discussed in a broad sense the policy on taxes, and I know that the government wants to lower taxes, which in principle I think is positive because it's growth friendly. For us at ESM is always this question, what is growth friendly, what is not growth friendly? And it is a fact that tax rates in Greece, particular corporate income tax, personal income tax, are high. The rates are high. So to lower rates in principle is fine. The question is always how it's financed, because it means there will be less revenue if the rates are lowered. So one also has to discuss the other side of that equation. One way, for instance, on personal income tax would be to broaden the tax base, because the number of people who actually pay taxes in Greece is relatively small compared to all other European countries. So lower tax rates with broader tax base with lower rates, that's one possible way. But we didn't go into all those details. It's a bit too early for that. The European institutions will come back in September to analyze in more detail. But the Finance Minister also promised that we would get detailed information in the next few days, and that's a very good sign of cooperation.
Did you discuss about the primary surpluses targets? We know that the goal of the new government is to accelerate reforms in order to boost growth. If this happens, do you think it will help to integrate the debate on reducing the targets for primary surpluses?
I don't know when it will start. It's not relevant at the moment because the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister confirmed that they will stick to the agreed fiscal framework. Particularly when the 2020 budget is put together. Again, at ESM we have a very long perspective over the next 40 years, and we will continue to do our debt sustainability analysis, where debt relief, growth, fiscal measures, the fiscal balance, it all has to be looked at together, and this can change over time. But I think at the moment this is not relevant, and there was no suggestion, actually the opposite, there was confirmation that for this and next year the agreed fiscal targets will be maintained. That was not put into question.
But we will see in the future.
Of course, the future is probably a bit different from what we thought a year ago, because many variables change, but it's very hard to predict at the moment in what direction. Growth in the end is a key factor when we look at that sustainability. That's why I always emphasized that from the ESM perspective, we have the same interest as the government and the Greek people to generate more growth. That is positive. There's no disagreement on that. The question is what to do now to get to higher growth, because what happened the last 3 months with the previous government went in the other direction. There were measures taken that were not growth friendly, and therefore it's important now to get back to the old baseline scenario.
Do you think that there is a fiscal gap for 2019?
That's what the European institutions, not only the ESM, have said publicly, that based on the measures taken over the last 2 months, we see a risk that the target for this year might not be reached. Of course, we are now in July, so 5 months are still to come, and we hope that the government is right. The finance minister told me that his best assessment at the moment is that the target for this year will be reached. That will be looked at in great detail when the mission returns in September.
In the spring, the previous government announced its intention to proceed with the early repayment of IMF loan to Greece, the expensive part. Where we stand on that issue? Did you discuss it with Mr. Mitsotakis or Mr. Staikouras?
I did not discuss that the last few days, but I would expect that the new government will also make that request, and then we will take it up. I have said previously, and that remains true, that it is in the interest also of the creditors, and the ESM is the main creditor, to repay debt that is particularly expensive, and certain parts of the IMF loan are expensive, so it would make sense to prepay that. But it was not discussed the last few days.
Let's come to the markets. In recent months, especially after the announcement of the election, the yield of the Greek bond has fallen sharply. However, Greece is not yet in investment grade. When do you think this could happen, and how the Greek economy could benefit from that?
So it's correct, the markets have reacted positively to the announcements of the new government, and the bond issue earlier this week was very, very successful at relatively low interest rates and heavily oversubscribed. Markets will, of course, monitor very closely what the government will be doing, but if the implementation is along the lines of the announcements of the government, then I think markets will see that as positive. And also foreign investors, I think, will look at it positively, which is also very important. Rating agencies will also react, that's clear. The ratings have improved over the last few years significantly, but it's not investment grade yet. I cannot say when the rating agencies will take the next steps, but it will depend on government policies. So it's one more reason to follow up, but I have no doubts that the government has the intention to do that, to implement the growth-friendly policies they have been talking about.
Let's come to the European economy. Brexit, possible hard Brexit, trade and geopolitical tensions. In which fields do you think that Eurozone countries could take attention in order to avoid recession? And a second thing, are you in favor of more accommodative monetary policy if needed?
I don't see the risk of a recession. We see clearly a slowdown in growth for the euro area as a whole, but to some extent that was to be expected and unavoidable, because growth rates the last 3 years were particularly strong, and they could be strong because there was what the economists call an output gap. There was slack in the economy, so there could be growth above the normal trend growth, but only for a while. And this output gap is closed now, so growth will only be around trend growth, which for the euro area is certainly no more than around 1.5%. So that slowdown coming from 2.5 to 2 to 1.5 was to be expected, and in a way people should not be too surprised But then there are risks, of course, on top of that normalization. Brexit, we have to wait and see, but I think it's good to be prepared for the worst. The trade war is already showing negative results. World trade is stagnating, and that has a negative impact on the growth of many countries. So there are these risks, and some risks are materializing. But I don't see the risk of a recession because employment is growing until now in most European countries. At the same time, wages are going up slowly, still in a healthy way. But that together, more jobs with higher wages means there's more money for consumption, and that will stabilize the economy. So recession I don't see unless other risks, geopolitical risks that one cannot forecast also happen. But normally I see a slowdown, but not a recession. So I don't think that one has to be too concerned, but one has to think about how economies can be strengthened. Indeed, the program of the new Greek government fits very well in that perspective. Structural reforms to strengthen the economy are necessary in many European countries, not only in Greece.
I will ask you about Madame Lagarde and her nomination as the president of the ECB. What are the main challenges she will have to face?
Well, the job of ECB president is a very difficult job because 19 countries have one monetary policy, but otherwise they have their own economic policies. So to bring that all together is not easy. We also know monetary union is not complete yet. There are some elements missing on banking union, on the fiscal side. And I think she will play a strong role in that. She has clear views on what should be done. She has very good experience from her time at the IMF, and before that she was French finance minister. She knows everybody in Europe and around the world. She is a person who listens and is able to integrate different views. So I think she's the right person at the right time.
Do you think that she is the rock star of international finance?
I don't know how you define rock star.
Not me, Financial Times.
But certainly she's a very special person, a very prominent person, and I think we are very lucky to have her back in Europe.
Mr. Redi, thank you.